As Israel's war against Gaza rages on, this man appears again and again on my feed, on Jordan Peterson, on Piers Morgan, as some kind of authority, an insider on what's really happening.
It's not about Palestine. There is no such a thing as Palestine.
This is Mosab Hassan Yousef, the self-declared son of Hamas. But who is he really? How did he, a Palestinian, become one of the biggest spies and assets of the Israeli occupation forces? Why is he such an active proponent of the Israelis and their war against the Palestinians? And why is his story important?
I will be there after Hamas is dead.
This is the story of a man and his relationship with his father, his fractured homeland, and what the Israeli intelligence apparatus did to make him hate his own people. Okay, so the story goes like this. It's the 5th of May 1978. Just a few months prior, Israel had invaded Lebanon, killing 2,000 Lebanese civilians and 100 Palestinian fighters. The occupation is fierce and brutal and in full effect. In Ramallah, in the West Bank, Sheikh Hassan Yousef and his wife Saba welcome home their firstborn son. The world they bring him into is one of chaos and turmoil, so they name him Mosab, a name which means strong, the one who endures hardship. Sheikh Hassan is a religious man and is involved with the Muslim Brotherhood. So as Mosab grows up in this household, he sees his father's active struggle against the occupation.
I was always very, very proud of him. I saw him as my highest example. If there was a God that I could see at that time and a higher authority in my life, it was my dad.
It's 1987, Hamas is officially formed, and though Sheikh Ahmed Yassin is credited as its founder, Sheikh Hassan is also recognized as a key player. The first intifada begins. Though Mosab acknowledges his father as a loving man, Sheikh Hassan has an even greater love for the cause. Perhaps in those early stages in Mosab's life, when he needed his father the most, Sheikh Hassan was too preoccupied with the movement, but that's the world they're trapped in. So in Sheikh Hassan's eyes, his participation in the movement was for his son just as much as for his people. His father would repeatedly be arrested by the Israelis, so in his rage and frustration against the enemy, and perhaps for his father's approval, Mosab turns to the resistance. Though not a full member of Hamas, Mosab tries to emulate the men around him. In 1996, whilst trying to smuggle guns, he is caught and arrested by the Israeli forces. This is his first time in prison, and something happens during that time that I think is the real reason he becomes the man he is. But we'll touch more on that later. Inside this Israeli prison are hundreds of other Palestinian men arrested for resisting the occupation. Some of them are scary. The prison guards create an environment of distrust, so the men turn on one another. He sees the torture, the paranoia, the lies. He feels under threat, and though he's never harmed for being the son of the great Sheikh Hassan, the pressure builds and he sees things that slowly change his view of his people. He finally gets approached by an agent of Shin Bet, Gonen Ben Yitzhak, and after some persuasion, Mosab decides to begin working for them, giving Gonen key information about the resistance. In exchange, they protect him and also his father. Years go by as Mosab becomes one of the most valuable assets for the Shin Bet, until eventually Mosab decides on a new path for himself. He leaves Palestine for good and makes a new life for himself in the US, and there he converts to Christianity. This is the story we're told, of a man who becomes disillusioned, who is shown the light by the Israeli security services and takes a course of action against his father's organization. But this isn't the full picture. Why would a man who was seeing the brutality of what the IDF were doing on a daily basis since he was a kid betray his own people and his own father? There's more to Mosab's story. You see, Mosab was an incredibly vulnerable teen when he was first arrested. Way more vulnerable than your average Palestinian kid. And to understand exactly how vulnerable, we have to go back to his childhood.
My father wanted from us to be connected always to the land and olive trees. At the age of 5, he asked me to go with our neighbors to see how people harvest olives and take care of their land. And the family that my father trusted with asked their son to take me home before the dark. This guy started to act in a weird way, trying to touch me, and I knew that he had evil desires. When I got back home, my mom was waiting, and I could not tell her a word about what happened. For some reason, I was ashamed.
Sexual abuse at such a young age has a significant impact on the development of a child's mind. In some cases, survivors struggle with trust and relationships, even with their own family. Mosab never told anyone about this traumatic incident because of the shame he felt. His attacker was Palestinian, and the trauma of that incident likely created the first crack in his self-identity. Alone with a dark secret, he grows up in an equally traumatic environment, with his father constantly being arrested and removed from his life, his people being persecuted, and his sense of self torn apart. With no outlet, he decides to rage against the occupation, but it's a floundering, aimless rage, only there to cope with his deep-seated traumas. This brings us back to his first arrest in 1996. In that Israeli prison, waiting to be interrogated and afraid of his fellow Palestinian inmates, the Shin Bet agent Gonen, who was quite a bit older, found in Mosab the perfect target. Gonen plays him, manipulates him, and turns his fears and trauma into a weapon against his people. No one really knows exactly what the Shin Bet said to Mosab, what they may have threatened him with or bribed him with. Those conversations are not available to us. But from Mosab's own admission, Gonen, in his efforts to win him over, becomes like a father. The Shin Bet give Mosab a new self-identity and purpose. Through their manipulation, their gifts and favors, they trick him into leaking information that leads to the arrest and targeted killings of Palestinians. Once again, Mosab finds himself trying to win the approval of a father. But this father only loves him to get what he wants. From this point, Mosab becomes one of the most high-profile spies for the Israelis. And in his search for validation, he spies on and betrays the Palestinian mission for self-determination. And though he thinks he's protecting his father, the Shin Bet only really keeps Sheikh Hassan alive so they can extract information through Mosab. When the needs of the Shin Bet eventually exceed what Mosab can provide, he decides to get out of the country and seek asylum in the US. And it's here, finally, he converts to Christianity, his former identity now completely shattered. Even in that situation, when Mosab calls to reveal the truth to his father, Sheikh Hassan still offers his son a chance to return home, telling him everything will be okay. Sheikh Hassan knows full well the lengths the Shin Bet are willing to go to achieve their goals. But it's too late. I find Mosab's story fascinating and tragic. All men are responsible for their actions, but what's undeniable is the ruthless effectiveness of the Israeli spy agency to twist people into serving them.
You need to understand his point of view, you need to understand his background, who is his family, what happened with him. You try to find their needs. And then when you know that, you know how to play with him. You also give him the notion that he's important for you, and you're not just using him. In Mosab's case, it helped us use him.
This is what Dan Efron says about the Shabak, the security services surveilling the West Bank. Shabak kept lists of every Palestinian in every town and village and ranked them in order of their potential usefulness. A Palestinian apt to be particularly well informed, the head of a clan or the brother of a top militant, would appear near the top of the list. Alongside each name, Shabak officials would write something about the person's personal life that could be leveraged in recruiting him as a spy. One might be waiting for permission to have his child treated in an Israeli hospital. When agents needed informers in a certain area, they would consult the list and go to work. Mosab's Israeli handlers knew full well how to work him for their own gains. And it's an old-school colonial strategy. By dividing communities, it becomes easier to conquer them. Ironically, just as the Nazis employed the Judenrat to keep the Jewish population under control, so too do the Israelis employ Palestinians as spies or even as henchmen. The Palestinian Authority, for example, can effectively be described as an extension of the Israeli government, even using violence and threats against its own population for the purpose of serving Israeli interests. Muhannad al-Khairi writes, its entire political agenda has worked against the Palestinian people. The constant use of threats, the silencing of all dissenting voices, the thuggish behavior of its police force through mass arrests of civilians, and the vandalism of their properties have reduced them to the role of police state, a police state that is securing the apartheid state of Israel's long-term policies in the region. Gaza is now almost completely destroyed, while their asset Mosab carries on in his mission to discredit and undermine the resistance movement. Since his departure from Palestine, his family has disowned him, and he has disowned his family and his people.
Israel must execute top Hamas leaders in prison, especially the mass murderers. And when I say execute top Hamas leaders, I mean no exception. That includes my own father.
This is the real story of the son of Hamas. This is the story of occupation. They tried to make you hate your own. With him, they succeeded. Right now, the Likud party, as well as the complex apparatus of legacy news supporting it, is trying to repulse the world with falsified accounts of war crimes, despite their own well-documented and ongoing illegal actions in Gaza and the West Bank. That's how they use the native informer. Such individuals offer the mainstream media the perfect mouthpiece to legitimize the claims of the occupier, whilst enabling military action and its subsequent tragedies. But as the war rages on, the world has woken up to these tricks. Even in the United States, which has always been a staunch supporter of Israel, protests have been steadily increasing and are now at a fever pitch. So when they wheel out people like Mosab Hassan Yousef, the people can see through it. Thank you so much for watching my first YouTube documentary. I hope you liked it. I hope you found it informative and useful. And if there's anything I missed or anything that you think would be worth noting, then please leave it in the comments. Subscribe to the channel. I'm going to be doing more interesting documentaries on topics that I think are important for the world and things that I'm really interested in. So it'd be awesome if you would join me on this journey. Peace.